My name is Blake Djavaherian. I'm an analyst for Crowdstrike Intelligence, where I monitor hacktivist as well as state nexus threats, primarily those originating in South and Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and as I'm going to be talking about today, Latin America. This discussion centers around an interesting discovery that my team and I made pretty recently regarding connections between a June intrusion operation and information operations using recycled materials stolen in intrusion operations, recycled toward information operations targeting at least one government and civil society in Latin America. Cool. So for those who aren't familiar with the threat actor Machete, it is a Latin America-focused threat actor that has been active for a long period of time, since at least 2010. During this period of time, they've used primarily one core malware family, known alternately as Ragwa, Rat, and of course Machete. This is a highly modular malware that is written in Python. It's heavily obfuscated all the time, can be kind of a pain to reverse. And they have incorporated new functions into it over time, as well as taken out capabilities depending on the mission scope at any given time. They tend to deliver this malware alongside decoy and lure content that is highly targeted, nearly always related to Latin American issues or organizations. For example, they've tended to use very good spoofs of government correspondence, acting as if it's from government organizations or in the direction toward government organizations. As well as likely stolen documents taken from legitimate Latin American organizations, especially in the previous 2 years, the Venezuelan armed forces. So they have very convincing decoy content. All of these factors have lent itself to an assessed target scope, primarily including Latin America, with special emphasis on Ecuador, Venezuela, some Nicaragua, Cuba, other countries in the region, as well as some groups internal to Colombia, most notably the FARC, the rebel group that I believe originally started up in like 64 or so, and in 2016 negotiated a ceasefire with the Colombian government. Since then, we haven't really noticed any targeting of that group since then. Now to jump into the incident that we observed in 2021, we found one Microsoft Office document that had malicious macros. It had generic decoy content that said, enable me in Spanish. I won't speak any Spanish. I don't want to butcher an accent. Based on this document was submitted to a public malware repository from an IP address based in Ecuador. Based on this document, we were able to find one that was nearly identical that also had a Spanish language file name, made the same network request, and the file name was directly related to the February 2021 general elections in Ecuador of this year. So it was very timely. We identified it pretty recently after this, and it had to do with Ecuadorian current events. And both make the identical network request to this adversary-controlled domain, the Dark Knight Rises number.online. For the retrieval of an instance of Machete malware disguised as, an installer for Google Chrome, pardon me. Now, based on this domain, we identified using passive DNS data the IP address that it has resolved to for the majority of 2021. Looking into this IP address, which has had comparatively low traffic, low resolution traffic during this time, we're able to identify a solid number of additional domains, primarily those that have to do or that have names associated with legislative issues, including one that was spoofing the Ecuadorian General Assembly, their legislative body, as well as other Spanish language themes, some like legal, copyright, whatever. And then there was one domain that really caught my eye as I was analyzing this, which is the justiciaamarada.org domain. Now, this domain, if you were to visit it throughout most of 2021, you would encounter a good amount of information on the page being hosted, alleging corruption on the part of Ecuadorian political officials, people that were still in power, as well as the former President Moreno, who's a subject of some controversy, as we'll get into later in the discussion, but was also hosted on this website was documents that were allegedly, and this was claimed on the website itself, stolen directly from the Ecuadorian judiciary, the federal judiciary at that. So on the left here, we have one of the documents, as well as on the right, we have screenshots from the website trying to corroborate these claims. So it has just screenshots of an Outlook allegedly belonging to a current Ecuadorian judicial official. So based on these network and thematic connections, we assessed that Machete and the malware deployment that I previously talked about had a common nexus or connection with whoever was stealing and dropping these documents that were pretty clearly meant to have an impact on the political and public views of individuals within Ecuador, especially in connection to how they view certain public officials. Now, based on that domain, we were able to find a little bit more through a unique combination of 4 name.com name servers, how these domains were registered. We were able to identify a slew of additional domains, many that have to do with generic login type stuff, a lot that also had Spanish language themes, some that had to do with Ecuador specifically as well. One of these, enapapers.com, doesn't really seem that interesting. It resembles another domain, enapapers.org, whatever. And both of the domains share the same combination of Cloudflare name servers. So it's based on that, it's pretty likely that they were administered under the same Cloudflare administrator. We found these connections, but who cares? Well, in early 2019, Ecuador underwent the Enapapers scandal, in which a threat actor or just a leaking entity using that domain that I previously mentioned, enapapers.org, released a slew of papers and documents taken from the Ecuadorian government, specifically smearing the president, Lenin Moreno, for his offshore tax haven, ENA Enterprises or something like that, named very tastefully for his 3 daughters, all 3 of them, their names end in ENA. The impacts of this were pretty interesting. It tarnished President Moreno's reputation. It didn't take him out of office. He was able to take it down pretty quickly, not the website, but to take down the allegations and try to distance himself from it. Also interesting though, Julian Assange at one point, or at least WikiLeaks, shared a link to the same enapapers.org thing, just as a sign of leaking support. Immediately following that, the Ecuadorian government expelled him from their embassy in London. Subsequently, he was arrested by Western authorities, and he is still in prison today. So what we have here is what we believe to be a very concerted, intrusion-enabled information operation connected to the activity previously described. While it definitely probably went a long way toward tarnishing Moreno's reputation, I would say Julian kind of got screwed the most, but that's just an immediate impact. Now, in terms of attribution for this activity, as I stated previously, there's some very interesting things about Machete in general. The target scope is very pertinent to the likely intelligence collection priorities of the Colombian government, including contractors and subcontractors that might work for the Colombian government doing this sort of activity. We haven't identified anything that would indicate sort of broader target scope. It's very pertinent to that regional interest, and as well as the sector level interest in military and government entities in the region. As we've also identified historical network infrastructure, registration patterns, hosting providers being used historically that were based in Colombia, and aspects such as this that make it pretty clear that previously they had some operational security issues that pinned them down to a certain geographical origin, as well as historical malware artifacts that we previously identified, we haven't seen recently, but more operational security issues where malware strings would mention specific Colombian bands, physical landmarks, things like that, that made it really clear that, at the very least, the malware developers behind it likely had some sort of nexus to Colombia. So as a result of this, CrowdStrike Intelligence attributes this activity to the Machete threat actor, which we attribute to the Colombian government in some sense. Anyway, thank you very much for hearing my spiel.